Awesome. So shall we kick it off?
Let's do it.
Good. So got to see you guys yesterday in New York. Always a treat to see everybody and have some berries. Better than ever. So it was real special to have these first flower berries that I got to try for the first time. So thank you. For everybody else joining, as you probably know, we're McWin. We've made an investment in Oishii, and it's one of our favorite portfolio companies at the moment, doing some really exciting things, kicking off some really exciting projects, and in the middle of several others. As you probably also know, we're raising an SPV now, and want to extend the opportunity to invest to some of our favorite LPs and other people in our network. So with that background, Brendan, Hiroki, love to introduce you guys. Would you guys want to kick it off and maybe give a few minutes on yourselves and on Oishi, and then from there jump into some questions moderated, and then some audience questions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Can I go first, Brendan?
Go. Yeah, hit it, Hiroki.
Well, first of all, it's my pleasure to be here today. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, my background is a little bit messy. I just flew in from the United States back to my home country, Japan. So I'm originally from Japan. I came to the U.S. about 7 years ago to do my master's at UC Berkeley. But prior to that, I started my career in consulting back here in Tokyo. And that's when I first came across the vertical farming industry here in Japan, where it took off before anywhere else around the world. So for those of you who are not familiar with this industry, the technology of vertical farming, which basically is a new way to grow crops in a completely sunless environment using LED lights and air conditionings to control the environment and grow crops anywhere around the world without being impacted by the outdoor conditions. So this technology was actually invented by large Japanese corporations like Panasonic, Toshiba, Sharp, and some of the big electronics companies who had all of the LEDs and the sensors and the HVACs and the technologies to make this technology happen. So they figured out how to grow leafy greens, mostly lettuces, in a vertical farm almost 20 years ago here in Japan. But what they figured out very quickly after they invented this technology was that it wasn't a viable business model, especially 20 years ago, because construction costs of vertical farms were very expensive. And also there were lots of fresh, high quality lettuces available on the market back then in Japan, and they couldn't charge much premium for these vertical farm grown products. So as a consultant, I tried to help them figure out how to turn this amazing technology into a profitable business model for multiple years. But we ultimately came to the conclusion that it wasn't the right time, right? We were too early and people didn't need this technology back then in Japan. And so even though the technology was really fascinating and people were really excited about it, just after a few years, people forgot about this technology because it wasn't a viable business model. And but then when I came to the US in 2015 to do my MBA at UC Berkeley, that was right around when vertical farming industry started to take off here in the United States, almost 10 years after Japan invented this technology. And the reason was a little bit different, and it was driven mostly by the sustainability pressure on this industry. And when you think about what goes into agriculture, you need stable weather conditions, access to land, cheap land, water, use of pesticides. All of these things were almost granted, and it was very accessible many years ago. But when you look at today, it's extremely hard to source these things, especially in a country like the United States, where even though it's a huge country, actually most of fresh produce is produced in California, and so you're competing on commercial real estate, and there's drought every year, and a lot of the illegal labor forces got driven out of the country in the past few years. So cost of conventional agriculture started to skyrocket, whereas cost of vertical farming started to go down. So people started thinking, well, maybe vertical farming might be the solution for solving this greater sustainability issue in the agriculture industry. So a lot of startups started to pop up here in the US. And because I was really the only one in the US back then in 2015 who had any prior experience in vertical farming, I got pulled in by a lot of investors, VCs and investors in Silicon Valley to help them conduct due diligences on some of these emerging startups who are, today's unicorns already. So I did that while I was a student at UC Berkeley. And I came to a conclusion that all of these companies were growing the same thing, which was leafy greens, because it's the easiest thing to grow in a vertical farm. And they were doing the exact same thing Japan was doing 10 years ago. So with my experience, just looking at that industry struggle back in Japan 10 years ago, and looking at these startups doing the exact same thing that Japan tried to do 10 years ago, I started thinking maybe there is a completely different approach to winning in this industry. And I can explain a little bit in more detail later, but our conclusion was let's skip leafy greens and grow something that is much harder to grow, but something that people can actually taste the difference in the product quality, so we can charge a higher premium and generate a very profitable business model from the start and build a brand on that product quality. So sorry that got a little long, but that's how I got into this business. Brendan?
Absolutely.
That's exactly what we were looking for. So thank you, Hiroki.
Thanks, Hiroki. And we'll, for those of you who aren't familiar with vertical farming in a little bit more detail, how it compares to conventional farming, we'll definitely get to that and we'll break it down in more detail. So hi, everybody. I'm Brendan, co-founder and COO. I come from a background of starting technology companies really since high school. Started a business in high school and in college. And I can say honestly that those were not successful. But I got all those repetitions in early of how to get product market fit, how to find the right co-founders and build the right teams from those failures, before I was 21 or 22 years old. Studied business at Georgetown University. And when I graduated, I ended up in the United States Marine Corps doing intelligence work. And I was lucky enough to be stationed in Hiroki's home country of Japan. And when I was there, I was overseeing intelligence collection activities covering about 40 countries within Asia. And so these are problem sets like North Korea and East China Sea and South China Sea, which are super fascinating. And in this work, I really became personally interested in what is the war of the next 50 to 100 years. I mean, we're familiar with a lot of the things that are happening right now, but I really wanted to know, how do we prevent the next big thing? And of all my work, what I was realizing was everything pointed to food and water security. And we kind of already see countries fighting those non-shooting wars, trying to move to other countries, secure shipping lanes to move food, secure land in other countries. But, I do think we're moving towards the actual kinetic or actual shooting war. So at the time, I realized, well, if this is a big problem, I want to jump in and try to solve it. So I had no background in agriculture, and I ended up starting an avocado company in Uganda in East Africa. So for those of you who are not familiar, avocados have have kind of a long life cycle from when you plant them to when you start producing. They're extremely expensive in the United States, maybe $2 or $3 per avocado. And the demand globally had been skyrocketing, especially in places in Asia and China specifically. So I got on a plane to Uganda, met a business partner online, bought an avocado oil machine from China, brought it in and just started building. So this is very, very smallholder farmer, right on the border of the Congo type stuff. And it was extremely difficult, but I started to understand some of the complexities of agriculture supply chains, but also how the climate was affecting those crops that were grown outdoors in that region of the world. And over the last 7 or 8 years, I've seen so much how that's changed. The avocado part of the business was moderately successful, but certainly not wildly successful. But one of the things that we realized was these smallholder farmers were growing specialty Arabica coffee. So some of the most amazing coffees from a high elevation region, and they were selling it to these middlemen who would sell it to other middlemen, and it would end up in Maxwell House or worse. But what we were able to do is collect some of that coffee and place it in some of the better coffee shops globally, which was a really fun and impactful business. We were able to pay the farmers fairly. However, as I reflected on what I was doing, there really wasn't scalability, and this would never create a paradigm shift. So while you have a profitable business, I wanted to be a part of kind of long-term paradigm shifting solutions. So I turned that over to my local business partner. And I spent 2 years looking at the vertical farming space. I wholeheartedly believe with this technology, when you can grow year round at consistent quantity, quality, and price pesticide free, that this is going to unlock the future of agriculture. So I met with the founders in the space. I saw their technologies. I tried their products. I looked at their business models. And ultimately, I was really disappointed because, as Hiroki kind of alluded to, they were all doing the same thing. They were all growing leafy greens, kale, spinach, lettuce, microgreens. None of them were even remotely close to profitability. The technologies, and this was maybe back in 2015, 2016, were already commoditized, right? There was nothing that truly differentiated how one company did it from another. We have a little bit of a different software, but it wasn't actually impactful to the business. And there was really no brand construction around it. The final point that I noticed was these companies were structured as kind of like tech bro startups and not manufacturing businesses, when in fact this industry needs to really do manufacturing of food at scale. So I was lucky enough to run into Hiroki at that time in 2015, and he explained the thesis, of course, that would work, which we'll get into more detail. He's like, you got to have product differentiation. Strawberries are a way to do that. You have to have a tech moat, which was super, obvious, like I guess at the time, but we're now 5, 6 years into the business, so we haven't seen any competitors enter. So that thesis was spot on. And then we had to construct brand for long-term defensibility. So to fast forward to where we're at, I oversee two things at the company. The first is how we design, construct, and operate our vertical farm facilities. And this is probably the most challenging part of the business that we've had to deal with. Many of our competitors are taking 24, 36, or even 48 months to build and operate a vertical farm, but we've built that internal capability at our company. We have our own general contracting firm. We do most of our own engineering. We are on sites and we operate them. So it's not a group of 30 consultants putting a project online. It's us running those projects with direct supplier relationships. And just as an example of what that's meant for the business, during the pandemic, we put online a 50,000 square foot or 5,000 square meter facility without a single bottleneck from global supply chain. We did the project on time and on budget. And the other thing I oversee at the company is actually just the easiest job in the world, which is managing our strategic retail partnerships. The product is so good that all of the retailers that we wanted to speak to in the United States proactively reached out to us and said, how do we introduce your product to our region? We'd love to get exclusivity. How can we place this in the front of our stores? So really for us, it was about selecting the best strategic and brand-oriented partners. And of course, we most recently launched with Whole Foods. So sorry, again, a long introduction, but looking forward to digging in here. So thanks, Stephen.
Great, thank you. And it's you guys are a really dynamic duo, and it's awesome to hear that story. It never gets old. So for those of us that aren't quite as familiar with vertical farming is and isn't, can you give us a little bit deeper of an explanation of it in the context of the broader indoor ag space?
Sure, sure. So, I wish we could just present our screen and then people will see what our farm looks like. But at a high level, so structurally, that how our farm is structured is unlike growing crops outdoors or even in a greenhouse. Our farms are built in almost like a warehouse like setup, right? Completely sunless environment, and we stack our farmland vertically, and that's why it's called vertical farms. And we're able to do that because every shelf has an LED inside, and you will not get any shades. And so instead of the sunlight, we use LED lights to conduct photosynthesis. We also use air conditioners to control the environment inside the room. We control things like fertigation, even things like CO2 levels, airspeed, all of these things in our farms. And what this does is it allows us to perfectly control the environment without being impacted by what's happening outside. So with this technology, essentially, you can grow these crops anywhere around the world as long as there's electricity. And that is really the beauty of this technology. And therefore, you don't have any seasonality. We produce our strawberries 365 days a year, which doesn't happen if you do it outdoors. So that is how it's structured. But in terms of the impact to the environment, there are many things that we do better than conventional agriculture. First of all, we don't have to be on a farmland. We can build this anywhere around the world. We recycle water, right? If you think about how watering is done in conventional agriculture, most of it is just, thrown into the soil, and then a lot of it just evaporates into the air. Whereas in our setup, we're able to collect everything that's not absorbed by the plants from the drain, and that gets recycled through our recycling skid, and then it goes back into the plants. So the water that we bring in at some point will be absorbed and will become a berry. So we use significantly less water resources. The other thing is, especially things like strawberries. These are grown in California traditionally here in the U.S., and it gets shipped all the way to other parts of the country. So in the case of New York, you're shipping these strawberries for more than 3,000 miles on a truck, right? And during the winter, when you can grow strawberries in California, you're shipping things all the way from Mexico, so probably like 4,000 miles, right? Whereas right now, our facility sits right next to New York, about 2 miles from the city. So we cut all of that food miles. And because we were able to do that, we're able to also cut all of the food loss that's happening as well. And I think the final thing I would add is because we operate this in a very sterile environment or a very clean environment, we don't have to rely on any use of pesticides. So that is the advantage of vertical farming, and why people are shifting towards this model compared to the conventional way of growing.
Okay, I just wanted to share a couple stories there. So last summer, prior to our big retail launch, I met with retailers from across the country, from West Coast to East Coast. And I would ask the same questions to all of them. But my favorite was, what's the biggest challenge you face with strawberries right now? And every single one of them had the same answer. So I met them over the summer, and they said, we've had to reject so much product that is unsellable at our retail locations because of climate issues from California fields. Now, as Hiroki mentioned, 90% of US strawberries are grown in California. If you have that 100-day heat shock on your field, that's going to directly impact the product quality. And over time, this is only going to get worse and worse. So if you fast forward 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I'm betting that California agriculture certainly doesn't exist in the same way it does now, which means that vertical farming takes over as the solution. I'll give you another story that I really love. A few years ago, we brought our strawberries to one of the better Michelin-starred restaurants in New York City. And as I walk in the door to meet the chef, the food inspectors for the city come in at the same time. So obviously the chef has an inspection. She says, "Oh, I got to handle this. Put the berries in the fridge." So I put the strawberries in the fridge, and I never heard back from her, which had never happened before. The chefs usually try them. They're like, "This is amazing. We'd love to put this on our menu." And we had a mutual friend, so I reached out and I said, "Hey, whatever happened to Emma and those berries I dropped off?" Well, she forgot about them. And somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks later, she opened her fridge and she saw the strawberries, and there was no mold, and they visually looked fine, which is something that she'd never seen before. So she actually thought that we were using some type of chemical or preservative, when in fact the reason that was able to happen is because we harvest and distribute the same day, and we grow in a completely clean environment. So you're not going to see that bacteria degrade the product. So there are so many benefits of strawberry vertical farming that we see from the retailers and the customers.
I actually hadn't heard that story before, so thanks for sharing it. That's the fun part of these guys. You can talk to them 100 times and always hear different stories. So one thing that did come up in our conversation yesterday that I don't think you brought up today is the travel requirements and environmental requirements of the berries as grown today in an outdoor environment requires varietal selections, or I guess limits your varietal selections. Do you guys want to comment on that for a minute?
Of course. So because of the way current agriculture or strawberry production or the supply chain works here in the US, most of the strawberry or all of the strawberries that's grown in the US or outside of Japan are really optimized for long distance transportation and mass production. And which means that they're breeding these varieties that are harder and that are less juicier, and usually they're less sweet, because they need to withstand 5 days, 6 days of transportation just sitting on a truck. And so these varieties are significantly less sweeter compared to the ones that's grown or developed in Japan. because Japan is a very small country. You can get to the northernmost island or the southernmost island in less than a day, which means that you don't have to optimize for those long distance transportation. And traditionally, Japan has been really good at optimizing food for the quality. So the strawberries that's been bred and selected in Japan are very sweet, very soft, very fragile, but very sweet and very juicy. And they're actually even grown during the winter. So in Japan, strawberries are a winter crop, whereas outside of Japan, it's mostly a summer crop. You grow them outside, right? And so it's a completely different type of strawberries that we're able to grow here in New Jersey, because of this environment that we're able to replicate the Japanese Alps climate environment in New Jersey.
And that brings me to a related point, which is that the brandability of your berry is unlike anything I've seen in produce until now. Could you guys talk about that for a bit?
Absolutely. And Hiroki, maybe I think to really frame the question, maybe you could take a step back and talk through like the key reasons of why strawberries. Because I know we've been saying leafy greens and strawberries, and we're focused here, but because that's one of the three main tenets.
Yeah, of course. So when I started thinking about starting a vertical farm startup in around 2016, I saw all of these companies trying to grow leafy greens, and I saw this industry struggle a lot in Japan 10 years ago. So in my mind, I was starting to think, what is the right strategy to really win big in this industry, knowing that in, not in 2 years, 3 years, but in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, this whole industry is gonna move towards vertical farming, and this industry is going to be a $1 trillion industry. So if you think about all of the things that can be grown in a vertical farm, lettuce, tomatoes, strawberries, all of these things, when you add all of these things together, it's a massive, massive market. And so in my mind, when I started the company, I wasn't just trying to raise money, raise Series A, raise Series B, and IPO. That wasn't the goal. The goal that Brennan and I had was, how do we become the Tesla of agriculture? How do we become the #1 global brand in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? So we started thinking really long-term strategically. And I saw 3 fundamental problems with this industry back then. The first one was profitability problem. So none of these companies, because they were growing only leafy greens, and because leafy greens you can't sell with a much of a premium, none of these companies had any were generating any profit. So I thought, we have to start with something that can generate strong cash flow in order to convince investors that this is a viable business model, or otherwise the same thing that happened in Japan 10 years ago would happen again here. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was, if our business model became profitable, everyone's going to come and flood, come into the business. So we have to have some kind of technology moat. So let's not go straight to leafy greens, which everyone shares the same technology, and do something that no one has done before, and something that was, almost said to be impossible to grow. We have to have a tech moat. That was the second point. And then the third point was, when you think about the long-term trend, even if we have a tech moat at the start, people are going to figure out how to grow strawberries or tomatoes or all the other things beyond leafy greens at some point. And the most important thing at that point, in order to win, is to already have built a very strong brand by the time our competitors start figure out how to grow strawberries, right? And if you think about how Tesla did it, it's very clear. They came into the market with a product called the Roadster, which was not just any electric vehicle, but an electric vehicle that was faster than a Porsche. And it looked elegant and had all these cool features and softwares that traditional cars didn't have. So people instantly understood that this is a completely different product, and people went crazy about it. While at the same time, almost at the same time, Nissan, I'm not sure if everyone remembers, Nissan had a product called Nissan Leaf, which was also an electric vehicle, which was 10 times cheaper, but people didn't ultimately care because it wasn't that much different from conventional cars. And what happened 10 years down the road was, because Tesla had that impact, that paradigm shifting product on the market, everyone looks at Tesla as the #1 brand. And 10 years later, Nissan is just one of the other 100 companies that can make these electric vehicles. And so I thought strawberries was something that we could generate profit from the start, especially if we can grow these exceptionally high quality Japanese varietal strawberries, something that has a few years of technology moat, because in order to grow strawberries and flowering fruits, you need to fly bees to conduct pollination, and people thought that was impossible to do in a vertical farm, and a lot of other things on the technology front. And then most importantly, something that you can really build a strong brand around, because it's really hard to do this with the head of lettuce.
And Brendan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or does that cover it pretty well?
I think it covers it. I would just wanted to note to Hiroki that if you have materials to share, you should be able to share screen now. Just as a side note. I've been messaging him that, but he's been so focused on presenting the the story.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I think maybe Stephen, this is kind of a nice segue to talking a little bit about the evolution of the business. I know there's been a lot of PR lately on Whole Foods launch and retail launch. So to move forward with the Tesla analogy, right? We started with the Roadster, and I want to explain what that product was and how we distributed it. And then right now we're at our Model S, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And I want to talk about what our Model 3 and beyond will be. So a few years ago, we built our first farm, and we called this small farm. So imagine a warehouse about 500 square meters. And we, kind of personally put the tools together and built the first structures. And we learned a lot, right? And then we brought in the plants from Japan, and we did all of our own farming. And once we nailed the technology, we had our first omakase berries. We knew they were an excellent product, and we thought to ourselves, well, where could we place this product to a customer that if we say we're at this customer, everybody will know that this is the best product in the world? So for us, it was, of course, Michelin-starred restaurants. And for those of you who are familiar, Michelin ranks the top restaurants in the world, and they use a 3-star system. In New York City, there's just 5 Michelin 3-starred restaurants. So we said, okay, we want to get Michelin 3 stars for our first customer. We looked at the list, and one of those restaurants was a Japanese restaurant called Maso. So we said, well, that's cheating. We can't sell to them because they're Japanese, and this is a Japanese strawberry, and no investor is going to believe that story. And then we looked at the other 4, and 3 of them were just too big. I mean, they were like Tom Keller's restaurant, and they do so many tables a day, and we just had this small farm facility. So we looked at Chef's Table at Brooklyn Fair. We said Michelin 3 stars, it's very small. We brought the product to him, to the chef, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Let's start tomorrow." So at that point, we launched our omakase berry, our Roadster, to Michelin-starred restaurants. And once we got in the first restaurant, it kind of spread like wildfire. All the chefs would reach out and they say, "Hey, how do I put you on my menu?" And then all the customers who went to those restaurants, they tried the berry. They're like, "This is very unique and super amazing. Where do I buy it?" And they went on our website and they reached out to us, and we didn't even have a sales channel for it at the time to reach customers. So we set up a wait list of over 2,000 people, and we give them 24 hours notice, and we say, "Hey, meet us tomorrow at the World Trade Center at 6 p.m. Pay us $50 now, and we'll get you a product." And just like that, we started building out this really amazing business. And as Hiroki mentioned, starts with quality, and we were able to build that brand and that association with the best chefs in the world. So that when we went to investors and when we talked to people in the community, we'd say, "Yeah, we're at all these Michelin-starred restaurants," and people just got it. Yeah, you would never get in those restaurants unless you had product quality. So that was small farm. At that point, then we said, well, we need to prove that we can do this at larger scale. So we raised the first tranche of our Series A from a Tokyo-based investor whose main LP is Toyota. So this is the way that Toyota invests in like manufacturing, industrial, and automation technologies. And we built what we call Medium Farm. This project we also built ourselves. We put it online in 13 weeks, and we grew more omakase berries. At this point, we thought maybe we'll have to decrease price. But what we learned from the market was there was so much demand at that $50 price point that we were able to set up direct-to-consumer delivery in all sorts of unique channels and super high-end retail tests because the demand was there. But this medium farm was really just a setup for us to get to our Model S. And to do that, we built what we call large farm. So large farm enables us to produce at scale. We're about 100x where we were with small farm, and enter the retail market. So when we thought about how do we choose the right retail partner to set us up for success, we thought about 2 things. The first is brand. Some of our competitors in the space have chosen to partner with Walmart, for example, or Kroger. And while those have scalable distribution channels, they don't have the brand association that we want. And it's difficult to go from the bottom to the top. So brand was most important. And the second thing was scalability. How do we find a retail partner who's not just regional, but who we can launch with in New York City to say 15 to 20 retail stores, expand to the whole region of 50 stores, and then copy and paste that model across the country to reach a massive market? So of course, the answer for us was Whole Foods. So we built this large farm. It took us about 6 months. We put it online. We have plants in the units, and it's coming online between now and the end of the year. Most of the units are already producing. So what we did was we launched on the 1st of June with Whole Foods at their new flagship store in Manhattan. All the way up to the CEO, they were very adamant, we want this product at the new flagship launch. So from here, now we're in 5 Whole Foods stores just a few weeks later. Over the next couple of months, we'll be going to another 10 and then potentially 20 to 25 total stores, but all concentrated in the New York City region. But there's a huge problem with this. And the problem is that we don't have enough supply to meet the demand, not just, in this region, but across the country. So if you think about a single Whole Foods region, the chain has 500 stores. There's 50 stores just in the Northeast region. We're not even able to meet 50% of them. And in doing so, we sell out sometimes by 2 p.m. or 5 p.m. So we're missing a huge opportunity to get more product to customers. So to do this, we are embarking on what we call a mega farm project, and that's the next evolution of their business. It's the same technology. It's simply deployed at larger scale. And while we already have exceptional unit economics, which are best in the vertical farm industry, because we'll be moving this facility just a little bit further from New York City, maybe another hour outside of the city, we can capitalize on even better economics with lower labor costs, lower electricity costs, and lower rent costs as well. And that mega farm facility will get us from that 25 retail stores to over 200 or perhaps more retail stores still in the Northeast region. So the problem still exists of once we hit that Northeast region of a couple hundred stores, we would want to copy and paste that model and that same technology to regions across the United States and then globally, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So that's kind of what I have for the evolution of the business model. Hiroki, I don't know if you had any points to add. I think you're muted as well.
Sorry, I said no. Let's move on to the next question. I think.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I think so that brought my mind to we'd mentioned unit economics and development of the brand. I think it's also worth at this point talking about the development of the price point of the product, because when we first started discussing, the elephant in the room was a $50 box of berries, right? And you mentioned the roadster sort of status of that, and now with the Whole Foods launch at $19.99 and still with excellent margins, it's clear that you've been able to bring that Model S to market. Would love to hear about how you've achieved that, and then how the model envisages getting that first mass affordable product to market beyond the Whole Foods limited launch.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the evolution from $50 to $20 is super important. And I should note that this is still the beginning, right? This is still the Model S, and we have a clear trajectory, in fact, already proven to get to our Model 3 and beyond that. So, as I mentioned, we are literally in 3 years at 100x the size that we were, right? So we have this incredible scale that we didn't have before, but there's 3 main drivers of how we're able to achieve that reduction. Excuse me. The first is CapEx reduction. So as our friends in outdoor production have this incredibly inflationary curve to everything that they're doing, for us, it's getting cheaper and cheaper. From each facility in its evolution, we've achieved and baked in a 20% CapEx reduction. That will continue even between our large farm and our mega farm facility, and that's super important. So CapEx through continuous improvement. The next is OpEx. So through innovation and process improvement, we continue to drive down our OpEx. The primary 2 drivers of that are labor and electricity. And then the third thing on top of that is, each plant has a yield potential. And we've gotten better and better at unlocking higher yields. So for us at 100x the scale, 20% on top of 20% on top of 20% CapEx reduction, incredible OpEx reduction at the same time as getting better at growing the crops. That's enabled us to get from $50 to $20 and do that with really incredible 40% plus EBITDA margins, which is awesome. And then, well, as we look at the price curve, even as we went to $19, a lot of investors will say, well, that's really expensive. And I think, Martine, and of course the European side, when you get the in-season strawberries, it's a few euros, maybe this market seems a little bit crazy. So we looked at it in 3 ways. The first way is we wanted to get pre-launch testing. So we took our strawberries and we went to markets in the Midwest and south of the United States. So we went to Ohio and Minnesota and Texas, and we did pop-up sales with sampling only. So we didn't do any marketing. Nobody in Ohio really knew about us at the time. And we were able to sell through a ton of product at this $19 price point very, very quickly in each of these cases. So that was one way that we built confidence. The second way we built confidence is we asked the retailers. As I mentioned last summer, I was talking to retailers across the country, point blank, how many berries per day could you sell at $50 in your stores? How many could you sell at $20 in your stores? How many could you sell at $10 and $5? And then we built kind of the retailer's assessment. So that was the second point. But these 2 things were both pre-Whole Foods launch. Now what we're building is a really compelling data set around the Whole Foods launch. And because we had so much confidence before, we've really been vindicated and proven that at this $19 price point, the product sells very quickly. And as we build this data set, we're building a massive TAM from Whole Foods alone. So if you're selling, a few $100,000 of product per Whole Foods, and you're multiplying that out across 500 Whole Foods locations, and Whole Foods just represents, a portion of the overall premium kind of retail market in the United States, you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in opportunity, potentially $1 billion in opportunity at this price point. The final thing I'll leave you with on price is at the $19 price point, if there is concerns, if there's a massive recession or anything, we have that margin, right? And this is something our competitors in the leafy green space don't have. So it's great if you believe it, but if you don't believe it, we have the backstop of like a very profitable business that sells at a lower price point. So then, I'll also mention what's beyond the Model S. Our next price point is probably something that's sub $10, right? It's an exceptionally tasting berry. It's something that we've already proven here in our facilities that simply has higher yield and gets us from just being at those Whole Foods to really starting to compete with that super premium organic market. And that's something that we're well on the way to execute within the next year. And then the final frontier, right? When people say, well, that's cool, $9 or $10 is still higher than conventional strawberries. How do you guys get to price parity? We are working on a fully automated farm concept, and the first full-scale prototype of that will be online by the end of the year. When you combine the economics of that facility with the yield potential of varieties we're testing for beyond our Model 3, you combine those things and you project against the field. By the end of the decade, we will be out competing the field with full automation, complete consistency, 365 days a year, with super high yield varieties that are specific for vertical farming. And we'll follow this same curve, the same Tesla model, Roadster to Model S to Model 3 and beyond, with new crops like tomatoes and melons as well.
And I'm really glad that you mentioned that automated facility, Farm of the Future. Just as a mechanical engineer for our audience, I can say that it's the most beautiful design, the most elegant design for automation that I've seen outside of the automotive manufacturing space. It really is a well thought out facility, and it's imminent. It's not a pie in the sky kind of thing. The design is very mature and absolutely beautiful. And one thing that I'd like to note as well, and you guys can comment on this, is the beauty of your business model is that it's so conservative in that it doesn't lean on any of these future projects, Farm of the Future, future varietals, bespoke lighting that's certainly going to come online over the course of the next few builds, to achieve these price points and to achieve the still very positive unit economics at lower price points. Did you guys have anything to add on those elements?
Sure. So I think, when we talk about price, people assume that, we had to sell it at $50 because that was our cost. Or, we're now selling at 90.99 because that is the maximum we can lower the price. But that is absolutely not the case. And we're just, coming up with these price points that we know that the market exists and the market can absorb. So even though we're selling at 90.99, and the market is probably as big as 500 to $1 billion in the US, um, we don't have there's no reason to drop the price from there because there's no competition at that quality in the market, right? And if you take
You're
this
supply
product outside of
constrained. Yeah. You're supply
exactly, we're
constrained from that.
100% supply constrained. So, but even with that, we know that at some point there's going to be competition, and we have to keep on reducing the cost down, and that's why we're investing behind the scenes on all of these automation and farm in the future initiatives. So I think what Stephen, what you mentioned is extremely important, which is we already have a very profitable business model with pretty much no competition, known competition for the next 4 to 5 years at the minimum. And so we have that time to really build that brand and build that margin and cash flow into our business model and really prepare for 10 years, 20 years out when other people start growing strawberries in a vertical farm. But at that point, we would have already, reduced our costs so much, and we would have, generated so much cash flow that we'd be in a really good position.
Yeah, we use a couple analogies quite frequently, which resonate at least with the US audience. And the first is specialty coffee and Starbucks in particular. So, I remember as a kid, it wasn't a thing. People wouldn't spend two, three, four, even $5 on a latte or a cappuccino. The market didn't exist. Grew up in a middle class family, and my mother would drive by Starbucks and be like, I'll never spend $4 on a coffee, right? And then you fast forward 20 years, and my mother's buying $4 coffees, as just a regular middle class dental hygienist, right? And it shows you that it's not an absurd expenditure, but like Starbucks has reframed what we think about coffee and specialty, and it's not even that good. And then, Lululemon is another example of the athleisure industry went from like your track suits and stuff that you'd wear to like sporting competitions to Lululemon and ultra luxury. And if you look at Lululemon, they built such an exceptional brand that they were able to charge $100 for yoga pants. And if you think about who wears those yoga pants, it's not just the wealthy. It's college students that are in debt. It's everybody. And so they created this willingness to spend and this blue ocean opportunity that exists in produce as well. And it's something that we're validating. So it's not necessarily that we're trying to compete, at least in the short term, head to head, but it's that we're creating a new market size in the strawberry industry. And the strawberry industry in particular it's over $30 billion globally, but it is supply constrained. It's also quality constrained, I'd say, as well. So in a world in which you're able to grow consistent quantity and quality and price year round next to any consumer all over the world, it potentially is a much larger market as well that we're looking to tackle.
Yeah, and I really like the way that you put it with Lululemon. I mean, people spend $100 on a pair of yoga pants, and nobody will blink, and it's because people understand quality. And for some of the people that are joining us from Europe, I think that if one thing I'd want to make sure I point out is, in case you haven't had produce in the U.S., produce here sucks. I mean, vegetables, fruits here are all water and no taste, and they're bred for the ability to transport as we've mentioned earlier, and also for their appearance on the shelf, and that's about it. You don't have the kind of quality that you have in Europe and some other regions. So just wanted to point that out. And one other thing, so you guys mentioned a little bit about competition, and I think it makes sense to mention that a number of other companies have either announced new strawberry products coming from vertical farming fields, or at least announced projects to get into that space since the Whole Foods launch. I think in a very sort of reactionary way in many cases. And to a lot of investors, I think that the technology side, the technology mode, is a very mushy kind of thing that they perhaps don't understand so deeply. As sort of a last area before we open this up to some audience questions because of the time, could you comment on how much of a lead you have with some of these other competitors entering the vertical farming strawberry field, and what some of the drivers of that time advantage or moat are?
Of course. So, without going into too much of the details, right? If you imagine, how Tesla is producing their cars right now, and if you imagine, let's say, someone out of some college says, "Hey, we figured out how to we put together an electric vehicle. It runs on electricity." Even though they're both producing, electric vehicles, you instantly know that it's a completely different, stage of the development, right? And something similar is also happening in this industry. And so we've been doing this for the past 5 years, all of our time and resources dedicated to this one single crop, which was said to be, one of the hardest things to grow, right? And the reasons why strawberries are so hard to grow compared to leafy greens, there are many things, but just to name a few. One, the product life cycle is significantly longer than leafy greens, right? Leafy greens, you buy a seed, you put it into a sponge, you pour water, you throw it on under an LED. Almost anyone can grow a head of lettuce in about 30 days. And so it's actually not that sophisticated. And you also get R&D every 30 data every 30 days, so your R&D goes significantly fast. But if you think about flowering crops like strawberries, you first need to grow the seedling, which could take somewhere between 6 to 8 months, that alone. And then from there on, you need to change the environment to induce the flowers. And if you don't get enough flowers, you won't get yield. Sometimes people can't even get flowers, right? And then once the flowers come out, you need to make sure that they get pollinated. And pollination usually is conducted by bees, but bees were known not to operate well in a vertical farm because it's a completely sunless, artificial environment. And so this was a big bottleneck for the whole industry. And then, even if the bees can find the flowers and pollinate the berries, the product needs to actually taste good, right? So just within one life cycle of a strawberry, you're looking at, 12 months of experiments. And if you fail somewhere, during that 12 months, you're not going to get a great data. And so the R&D time in and of itself takes so much longer. And then there are so many different stages. So it's almost like tackling multiple different types of crops at the same time to get from start all the way to the end. And the other thing is, in order to grow these without pesticides is extremely difficult. So strawberries are constantly ranked #1 as the dirty dozen because it's so hard to grow them without pesticides. And we've figured out a way to basically using cloning technology to create a completely virus and bacteria-free seedling in our own facility, which will then go into a very clean, sterile room to grow these strawberries. And so we don't have to use pesticides, whereas our competitors are just buying seedlings that's grown somewhere else and then plug it into their lettuce system and say, hey, we've figured out how to grow strawberries. So if you actually want to make this into a profitable business model, there's a long way to get there. Almost anyone can just produce a strawberry in a vertical farm. That in and of itself is not a big challenge, but in order to do this at a scale without getting any disease outbreaks, making sure that the margins work, all of these little things really need to line up and work out in order to have a profitable bottom line at the end at a scale. And that's what we've been doing for the past 4 or 5 years. And just looking at the scale of the operations of our competitors, they're probably, where we were on our year 1 or year 2 at max, right? So if they, dumped all of their resources and, their mind share working on leafy greens and focused exclusively on strawberries like how we did, maybe they might be able to, catch up in the next few years. But that's, I think, the technology moat that we have. But the other thing that I'd like to mention is besides from the technology moat, we're growing Japanese varietal strawberries. And as I mentioned, these are genetically completely different. And the way you grow them are completely different. There's no one in this country who knows how to maintain, how to grow these Japanese varietal strawberries. And there are export bans and legal enforcements that were implemented in the past couple of years. So it's almost impossible for competitors to even get their hands on these Japanese varietals. So even if they figure out how to grow strawberries in a vertical farm, at best what they can grow is a fresher version of the strawberries that's currently already grown in California. So the quality will never match our product.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, sorry to interrupt, Stephen, just to give you a couple specific examples. The largest strawberry grower in the world is Driscoll's. It's a California-based company. And the most highly capitalized vertical farm in the industry is Plenty. They've raised almost $1 billion. SoftBank money is in there as well, which I know the McGuinn guys don't really like. And about 2 years ago, they announced a partnership, and it was like Driscoll's is going to partner with Plenty to bring a strawberry to the vertical farm market. And at the time, many investors and friends who knew about what we were doing reached out and said, "Oh my gosh, you guys are done." Right. Well, 2 years later, there's not a single strawberry product to market delivered by the Driscoll's Plenty partnership. And the strawberries that are in R&D, we have a little bit of access to that information, and they're of poor quality. Because basically what they're doing is they're engineering California field varieties and simply putting them in a vertical farm. So they're not able to deliver on that product quality, and they certainly are years away from the scale that we're at. The other story I'll give you is of a company called Bowery. Bowery launched a limited release strawberry product. I think they've raised about $650 million in venture capital. So for reference, we're talking about players that have raised 5 to 10 times the amount of capital as us. And we've tried this product. I mean, we're in these markets trying it, and it looks like it's grown in a California field and not a vertical farm. All of the product is different sizes. They're facing pollination issues. It looks misshapen. We know why it's misshapen. It's incredibly inconsistent. From pack 1 to pack 10, you're talking about different flavor profiles. And for some reason, it doesn't have staying power inside of your refrigerator. So even though a competitor has launched a limited release strawberry, nobody's talking about it because they're not delivering anything that's different than what's grown in the field.
Yeah. And thank you guys for mentioning all of these different aspects that we didn't get into earlier, from plant ownership to plant sterility and facility sterility, tight environmental controls in your facility due to its design. These are all really important things. I've run over. I wanted to leave 15 minutes for audience questions, and we're kind of down to 5, and maybe we can extend a little longer. But one of the first ones I've gotten is how's the market accepting vertical or indoor farming products? Everybody's embracing natural and traditional farming. Are you needing extra effort in communicating the product benefits, or do people understand? Is the demand for these products created because it's fashionable, or is it going to take some time to build the category? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll
Do you
take
want to take that, Brandon?
Sir, it is 100% about product quality. And when people taste our strawberry and they compare it to the field, nobody is going to choose the field. They just don't do it, right? Our strawberry is a better product. And when we communicate the product attributes, we're not leading with it's indoor, vertically farmed, yada, yada, yada. We're leading with try it, right? And that's the conversion there. So we haven't seen any issues whatsoever about it, vertical farming, or is it bad, or what is this? For us, it's you look at it visually, it's completely differentiated from what's grown in the field. You taste it, it's much better. You put it in your fridge, it lasts longer. So we are already out competing the field on product quality, and we really haven't seen any issues with vertical farming or messaging. But Hiroki, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Yeah, so if people haven't tasted our berries, they can say all sorts of things about vertical farming, or the way we grow them. But the moment, so we call it berries in mouths. That's the most important thing for us to really gain trust from consumers. So what we did was we've recruited this group of basically young college students who are called brand ambassadors, who will be in all of these stores regularly, giving out samples. Because tasting a sample of our berry is the easiest way to sell our berries, just as Brendan mentioned. And so as long as someone has a chance to taste our berries, everything else is solved.
Absolutely.
And to tell a really quick little anecdote, I was sitting at home doing due diligence on Oishii, and I started craving berries, and my girlfriend Emma, I went out to Whole Foods and bought the best box of organic berries that she could find. And this is after I'd tried Oishii's berries. She brought them home. I was all excited. Strawberries are literally my favorite fruit. And I tried them and I was like, man, these are terrible. I always joke that that Brendan and Hiroki completely ruined my favorite fruit for me. So thanks, guys. Looking forward to having them in Whole Foods here. So another question that we're getting from a couple people in the audience is along the lines of strawberries are great. What's next? That's one of them. Another one is how hard is it to enter other flowering crops? So sort of along the lines of future crop varietals and selections.
Sure. Sure. So I think that's a really good question. So we're already working on tomatoes and melons. We already have produced these special variety of tomatoes that is actually even sweeter than our strawberries. So their Brix level is higher than our berries. So it's going to be the sweetest tomatoes that you'll ever taste. And we're also working on melons, and these are probably going to be 3 to 4 times sweeter than what's available on the market today. And so, to answer the second half of the question, what we have essentially developed in terms of the technology with our berries is the pollination technology. So in order to operate bees to pollinate flowering crops, and this can be applied to any other flowering crop. So tomatoes, melons, peppers, cucumbers, name it. Almost anything beyond leafy greens require pollination. And then the other is disease management. So the technology to create these virus-free clone plants, these are also very similar. So all of these things that we've developed around strawberries will easily unlock all of the other flowering crops. And it's just a matter of time that we will expand from strawberries to tomatoes, melons, and then beyond.
And I can't emphasize enough how true what you said about the quality is. I was skeptical until I did the berry and mouth experiment, and all of a sudden it kind of all clicked. So I'm sure that the tomatoes and melons will be unbelievable as well. Next question I got was around regulation. So, are there any risks around regulation? Is this a situation where the field lacks regulation currently and therefore you're compliant? But could there potentially be a risk in the future? Let you guys jump into that.
Sure.
Brendan,
Yeah.
you want to talk about GFSI?
Yeah. I think, well, to frame this strategically, right? Like 5 or 10 years ago, the industry was much newer, right? And at that stage, that's where the industry probably faces the most regulatory risk of, figuring out, can this be done? Now we fast forward to where we are today. The USDA's National Organic Standards Board is already looking at vertical farming and it's approved for organic at that level. The USDA and FDA have set up urban agriculture advisory committees. There's a ton of capital in the space. So from the federal regulatory perspective, it's pretty much thumbs up, and not just thumbs up, but supported. So then the next level down would be, what is your kind of more regional state regulatory? We have had zero issues with permitting any of our farm systems. It is a manufacturing business. So that has not been an issue, and we select municipalities that basically pre-approve the construction. And because there are so many vertical farms, going up, especially on the leafy green side, we really don't foresee that to be a problem. So then the final kind of regulatory hurdle, quote unquote, would be food safety. So our food safety kind of regulatory bottle is GFSI, or Global Food Safety Initiative. It's just the standard for the industry. And we, without any preparation, received probably one of the highest scores ever in food safety for a strawberry facility, which allows us to enter any retail market. So we've unlocked federal, state, local, and retail regulation without issues.
That's awesome, guys. Thank you. And as the clock's winding down here, can I ask you for 30 seconds max each on your most important learning since you've started the project and your proudest moment since you started the project?
Sure, I'll go. So I think the biggest learning in the past 5 years is that your business will never grow bigger than your dream, right? When I started this business, I pitched the vision of becoming the Tesla of agriculture at UC Berkeley, and everyone, including our professors, laughed at us, right? And then they said it's a bold statement. But if we didn't have that vision, we would have maybe started at a much lower price point. We might have, optimized for revenue generation from day one and went to, a small mom and pop store, in New York, and we would have never been able to build this brand mode around us. And so, we really believed in the mission. And, as long as we do the homework properly, you don't have to always listen to the smart people that, telling you that you're going to fail. And I think that was probably the biggest lesson I learned. And my proudest moment was when we launched in Whole Foods and we sold out, before it even got into the busy hours in the evening. And that was the moment when I thought that, I proved everyone who told me that this wasn't going to go well wrong. And so that was my proudest moment.
And I think my biggest learning was really complementary to Hiroki. So when he's talking about the bold vision, mine was that must be coupled with flawless execution, right? At the end of the day, it's people and plans and parts and systems, and all of that has to come together. And what we see in this industry is a lot of people who have that bold vision, but haven't backed that up with the execution on the ground. And I think what our team does really well is marries those two. And yeah, in terms of proudest moment, I think, a couple of years ago, we were thinking about building a large project, a large facility. And the traditional approach is to use external design firms and contracting firms and construction firms and basically outsource it. No vertical farm is also a construction company. And as we bid this out, we realized that the timelines and costs were just absurd. And we made the strategic decision to do it in-house. And we said, we're going to become all of these things. We're going to be a construction company. We're going to have direct supplier relationships, and we're going to run our own procurement. And everybody said that is ludicrous. You guys can't take that on. But we did. And as a result, our cost to build a facility was 50% of what it would be as our competitors. And our timeline was, probably the same, about 50% as long. So I think my proudest moment was actually proving that we can do it, and we can do it better than the industry standards.
Awesome, guys. Thank you. And I got one more question, and I was trying to use that as sort of my last one, but I got one more question from somebody that invested into the SPV. So I wanted to make sure I sneak it in here. And it's essentially about what the difference in cost is between growing berries in a vertical farming environment versus an open field. And a couple things I'd want to mention quickly is for our European investors, I think it's difficult to wrap your head around paying $20 for a box of strawberries, and I get that. And maybe I'll let Brendan frame that in terms of what the real competition is here in the U.S. and let you guys roll with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question, and we will, Carlos, hit that head on. But as Steven's referencing, when we think about this Model S, we think about what are we actually competing with? And when a customer goes into the Whole Foods store and they see our strawberries and they see a Driscoll strawberry, it's really not a competitive product. It's a product that people, who have the means to will purchase consistently. It's a product that is celebratory. It's a product that is special. And when you think of like wines or chocolates or something like that, that's really a lot more analogous than just a pound of strawberries. So when we think about what the market size is, as I mentioned, we probably have $1 billion market in the United States alone just for this super premium category before we even have to think about, trying to execute against a Driscoll's organic as well. So we really want to think about expanding that pie in that super premium category and creating the blue ocean like Starbucks or like a Lululemon rather than direct cost competition. But Hiroki, I can certainly also tackle the question head on and talk through costs, but I'll see if you had any comments there as well.
I think at a high level, two things. One, when we compare the production cost side by side, yes, we're still more expensive than field grown, but what we're doing is we're capturing a lot of the supply, the value that's lost in the supply chain today. Right now, farmers sell it to middlemen, and that middleman sells it to another middleman, and then the retailers take 40%, 50% margin in the end. Whereas we go straight to Whole Foods, and they give us a much better margin because we're a better product and we have no competition. So we capture all of that, right? So when you consider that, even if our cost is a little bit higher, because we're completely getting out that middleman margin, we are a significantly more profitable business model. And the other thing I want to mention is that cost of conventional agriculture is skyrocketing because of the land prices, labor costs, all of these things. Whereas vertical farming cost is going to go down, is only going to go down. So even though right now, we might be here and they might be down here, there's clearly going to be a point in the next 10 years where we're actually going to be cheaper producing these strawberries per pound compared to outdoor growing.
Yeah, and just to nail that margin, I mentioned this the other day, but in the US, and this is just approximate here, if we take the total retail price of a strawberry, about 1/3 of that is a producer margin, 1/3 of that is the distributor, and 1/3 of that is the retailers who target a 30 to 50% margin on the product. A lot of times that producer gets squeezed and they actually are like 10 or 15 or 20% of that strawberry, which is actually quite sad. So for us, because we are the producer and we do all of our own direct delivery and distribution, that means we capture that 2/3. But I'll also mention in the berry category, we are something that brings people into the store. And what we have is preferred margins with all of our retail partners. I won't give you the exact number on this call with everybody. I'm happy to go offline, but we capture more of the strawberry value chain than almost any other company in the entire produce industry. And when we registered with Whole Foods, we tied for the quote unquote like lowest margin they've ever given to a produce product, and that is also semi-confidential. So yeah, and as Hiroki mentioned, it's a, once you have a fully automated farm facility and you swap in our 3rd and 4th cultivars, and you project out the end of decade field production cost, you're reaching price parity by 2030.
And that kind of jogs my mind and makes me think of other areas like solar energy or electric vehicles, where these products were too expensive until one day they weren't. And I think that for everybody on this call, you're looking at that company that's figured out how to do this in a profitable way and in a sustainable way going forward. So with that, guys, I know we've run over a few minutes. You guys are busy building a company. Thank you guys for taking the time to do this today. For everybody else on the call, thanks for the excellent questions. And we're happy to take this offline and answer any further questions that anyone might have. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we'll make sure to share the recording.
Thanks so much, the McWin
Thank you so
team.
much.
Would love to take it offline with anybody in the future. Thanks.
Cheers, guys. All the best.